The first thing anyone heard was the captain's voice, sharp and final, cutting through the cabin like a blade. "Sir, you need to step off the aircraft. Now!" The words landed heavy. They sucked the air out of row 17. A few heads snapped up. A few breaths caught. Somewhere near the back, a woman whispered, "Did he just say, off the plane?" A carry-on thumped against a seat frame as someone froze mid-motion. The engines were already humming, low and impatient, like the plane itself was offended by the delay. Nathaniel Brooks did not move. He stood in the aisle, with one hand resting on the worn leather handle of his bag, the other braced lightly against a seat back. 71 years old. Tall, but thinning. His shoulders still broad beneath a faded canvas jacket that had seen too many winters. His hair was silver, close-cropped, uneven in places where scars broke the line. His face held the calm of a man who had learned, long ago, that panic only feeds the fire. The captain waited. A beat too long. Long enough for the silence to throb. Nathaniel looked up slowly. Not defiant, not confused, just steady. The kind of look that made people uneasy without knowing why. "I haven't raised my voice," he said. His tone was low, even. "I haven't touched anyone. I haven't broken a rule." That was when the flight attendant shifted behind the captain, her jaw tight, her hands clenched at her sides. Karen Doyle, late 40s, immaculate uniform, posture sharp as a pressed crease. She leaned in, whispering just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "He's being uncooperative. We've asked him twice. He refuses to comply." Uncooperative. The word hung there. Ugly, flexible, dangerous in the wrong mouth. Nathaniel heard it. Of course he did. He heard everything these days. The way people chose their words when they thought no one important was listening. Moments earlier, none of this had existed. 10 minutes before boarding closed, Nathaniel had been just another older man shuffling down the jet bridge at Midway, the smell of jet fuel sharp in his nose, the floor vibrating faintly beneath his boots. He had taken his time, ignoring the impatience behind him, letting younger passengers rush past with their rolling luggage and restless urgency. He did not rush anymore. Rushing had taken enough from him. Seat 17 aisle. He liked the aisle. Less pressure on his knee. Easier to stand if the ache flared. He had placed his bag overhead carefully, angling it the way he always did, taking up less space than most. Habit. Courtesy. Things he had been taught mattered. Then the voice came from behind him. Tight, controlled, already irritated. "Excuse me, that space is for my bag." He turned to see her. Late 50s, well-dressed. Designer scarf draped just so, fingertips manicured, pale pink, gripping the handle of a hard-shell carry-on that looked like it had never touched a scuff in its life. Margaret Hale. She had said her name loudly enough when she complained to the gate agent earlier, as if volume equaled authority. "There's room," Nathaniel had said. "Plenty." She had smiled then, thin, cold. The kind of smile that wasn't meant to be shared. "I prefer my bag placed flat," she gestured. "Please move yours." He hadn't refused. Not at first. He had simply hesitated. The bin farther back was already full. He knew because he had checked. Walking backward against the flow of boarding passengers was not easy anymore. His knees stiffened when twisted the wrong way. His fingers tightened around the bag handle without him meaning to. "I can't lift it again easily," he had said. "This spot works." That was when her eyes changed. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was assessment, measurement, the quick calculation of who was likely to yield. She looked at his jacket, his boots, the absence of a watch on his wrist. She decided something in that moment, and the decision hardened her spine. "That's not my problem," she said, and raised her voice. "Flight attendant!" Karen had arrived fast. too fast, as if she had already been watching. "Sir, we need to keep the aisle clear," Karen said, smiling tightly at Margaret first, then turning to Nathaniel. "Could you move your bag?" Nathaniel had looked around. Other bags, larger bags, heavier bags, none being questioned. The imbalance registered, quiet and sharp. "There's still space," he said, "and I was here first." Margaret exhaled loudly. Unbelievable. Some people just don't understand how things work. That was the phrase. Some people. It slid into the air and stuck. Karen's smile thinned further. "Sir, I'm going to need you to cooperate." And Nathaniel, tired in a way that lived deep in the bones, had straightened slightly. Not much, just enough. "I am cooperating, I'm just not moving." That was the spark. Not shouting, not threats, just refusal. Calm refusal. The kind that unsettles people used to obedience. From there, everything accelerated. Karen's voice sharpened. Margaret stepped back, clutching her bag as if suddenly vulnerable. A man across the aisle frowned. A teenager 2 rows up lifted his phone a fraction, curiosity flickering. Karen said the words that changed the tone entirely. "He's making me uncomfortable." Uncomfortable became disruptive. Disruptive became a concern. A concern became a report. By the time the captain arrived, summoned from the cockpit with visible irritation, the narrative had already been written without Nathaniel's input. Older man, refusing instructions, delaying departure, making a paying customer feel unsafe. The captain, James Holloway, early 60s, grey at the temples, listened with the expression of a man calculating time, liability, and inconvenience. He looked at Nathaniel briefly, not unkindly, not closely either. "Sir," he said, his voice firm, "I'm going to ask you to gather your things and step off the aircraft so we can resolve this on the ground." Around them, the cabin held its breath. Nathaniel felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear, memory. He had stood in tighter spaces with louder men and higher stakes. He had learned when to speak and when to wait. He nodded once, slowly. "All right," he said, and reached for his bag. That was when the airport security officer stepped forward, hand raised slightly. "Routine," he said. "We just need to take a quick look inside before you exit." Nathaniel paused. His fingers lingered on the zipper. For a fraction of a second, doubt flickered across his face. Not because he had anything to hide, because he knew what came next would not belong to him anymore. He unzipped the bag. Inside were folded clothes. Neat. A paperback with a cracked spine. A small framed photograph wrapped in cloth, and beneath it, cradled carefully, a narrow wooden case, dark with age, polished by decades of careful handling. The officer frowned slightly. "What's that?" Nathaniel closed his eyes for a moment. Just a breath. Then he opened the case. Metal caught the overhead light. Dull at first, then unmistakable. Blue ribbon, white stars. A shape older than the plane, older than the argument, older than every assumption hanging in the air. Someone near the gate whispered, "No." Another voice, older, rough with disbelief, said it louder. "That's a Medal of Honor." The terminal went silent. Not the awkward hush of embarrassment, not the annoyed quiet of a delay. A real silence. Heavy. Absolute. The kind that presses down on the ears. Captain Holloway stared. The security officer stiffened. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, color draining from her face. Margaret's hand slipped from her bag handle. Nathaniel Brooks stood there, holding the weight of a day that had never really ended for him. The noise of the world finally gone, and for the first time since boarding began, no one told him what to do. No one spoke for several seconds, as if the air itself needed permission to move again. The Medal of Honor rested in Nathaniel Brooks's open hands, its ribbon slack, the metal dulled not by neglect, but by time. It did not shine the way people expected it to. It absorbed light instead, pulling attention inward. The kind of object that did not ask to be admired, only acknowledged. Captain Holloway was the first to recover. His throat worked as he swallowed. He had flown commercial aircraft for over 3 decades. He had carried senators, athletes, celebrities, men who believed the world bent because they entered a room. None of them had ever made him feel this suddenly small. "Sir," he began, then stopped. The script he used for difficult passengers no longer fit. He glanced back toward the cockpit, as if searching for a checklist that covered this. Karen Doyle took half a step backward. Her posture, once rigid, had softened without her noticing. The certainty she had leaned on moments earlier had cracked, replaced by something closer to fear. Not fear of Nathaniel, fear of being seen. Margaret Hale stared at the medal, then at Nathaniel's face, as if the two refused to align. Her lips parted, a protest forming, but nothing came out. She had spent her life confident in her instincts, confident she could read a room, read a person. The medal rewrote that belief in an instant, and she did not yet know how to defend herself from the realization. A man standing near the gate, hair white, back curved with age, removed his baseball cap and pressed it to his chest. "I served in Korea," he said quietly. His voice trembled, not from weakness, but memory. "Thank you, sir." The words rippled outward. Not applause, not noise, just acknowledgement, passed from one person to another in nods and softened expressions. Phones that had been half raised lowered again. This was not something to capture. This was something to witness. Nathaniel closed the case with care. The small click sounded louder than it should have. He slid it back into his bag, his hands steady now. He looked at Captain Holloway. "You asked me to step off the plane," he said. "I'll do that. I always follow orders when they're lawful." The captain shook his head once, sharply, as if correcting himself. "No." He paused, choosing his words. "No, sir. That won't be necessary." Karen inhaled sharply. "Captain," Holloway lifted a hand without turning. "That's enough." He faced Nathaniel fully now. His voice dropped, lost its edge. "I'm sorry for how this was handled. We should have slowed down. That's on me." Nathaniel studied him. Years ago, he would have weighed the apology, measured sincerity the way he once measured terrain. Now, he simply nodded. "Understood." Margaret found her voice at last. "I didn't know," she said. It came out thin, brittle. "If I had known." Nathaniel turned toward her, not sharply, not kindly either. "Knowing wouldn't have changed what you saw," he said. "Only what you assumed." The words landed with precision. Margaret flinched as if struck. Around them, the silence deepened again, not from shock this time, but recognition. Captain Holloway straightened. "Sir, please take your seat." He gestured toward the forward cabin, where an empty row waited. "We'll get you settled comfortably." Nathaniel hesitated. He glanced back at row 17. His seat, his place, the ordinary space he had chosen without expectation. "I'm fine where I was," he said. A voice rose from somewhere behind them. "Let him sit wherever he wants." Another followed. "He earned it." Holloway nodded once. "Very well." He turned to Karen. "Make it right." Karen swallowed. "Yes, Captain." She moved quickly now, but without the earlier sharpness. She cleared space, redirected bags, apologized under her breath to passengers she had brushed past minutes earlier. Her hands shook slightly as she worked. Margaret stood frozen. The world had not ended. The plane had not exploded. And yet something essential had been taken from her. The certainty that she was reasonable, that she was fair. She gathered her bag slowly, movements stiff, eyes fixed forward. No one stopped her. No one needed to. The walk back to her seat felt longer than the jet bridge had. As boarding resumed, the engine's hum returned to its earlier rhythm, but the cabin was changed. Conversations were quieter now, more deliberate. People glanced at Nathaniel, then looked away, unsure whether acknowledgement was intrusion. Nathaniel lowered himself into his seat with care. His knee protested, sharp and immediate. He closed his eyes briefly, breathing through it. A familiar pain, a reminder that medals did not stop time. Karen knelt beside him. "Sir," she said, voice unsteady, "I owe you an apology. I should have listened." He opened his eyes. "You should have slowed down," he replied. "There's a difference." She nodded, absorbing it. "Yes, sir." Captain Holloway's voice came over the intercom moments later, calm but altered. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be departing shortly." A pause. Then, more quietly, "Thank you for your understanding." As the plane began to taxi, Nathaniel stared out the window. The tarmac slid past, grey and endless. He saw reflections in the glass, faces layered over his own, past and present overlapping. The medal's weight pressed through the bag at his feet, not heavy, but insistent. Across the aisle, the man who had thanked him earlier leaned over slightly. "Name's Frank," he said. "Navy, 2 tours. Never thought I'd see one of those up close." Nathaniel gave a small smile. "Neither did I, once." Frank chuckled softly. "World's strange that way." Ahead, Margaret Hale sat rigid, staring straight ahead. Her reflection in the window looked older than she remembered. Not weaker, just exposed. She wondered how many times she had mistaken silence for insignificance. The answer unsettled her. As the wheels lifted from the ground, a subtle shift moved through the cabin. Not celebration, something steadier, a recalibration. People returned to their books, their screens, their thoughts, but with a new awareness humming beneath it all. Nathaniel closed his eyes again as the city fell away. Somewhere beyond the clouds, another meeting waited. Another room where decisions were made about people who would never be present. He would be there for that too. Not as a passenger this time. He exhaled slowly. The flight continued, but the story had already outgrown the aircraft, stretching beyond the runway, beyond the assumptions that had tried to contain it, moving quietly into places that would not remain silent for long. The cabin settled into a cautious normal, but the normal felt rehearsed now, fragile, as if one wrong note could tear it open again. Nathaniel Brooks remained still, hands folded loosely in his lap, eyes half-lidded. From the outside, he looked like any older man riding out turbulence. Inside, his thoughts moved with precision, the kind learned in rooms where decisions were made quietly and consequences arrived loudly. He had not planned for the medal to surface today. That had never been the intention. But intention mattered less than inevitability. Across the aisle, Frank shifted in his seat. "You know," he said after a moment, voice low, "people think medals are about glory." He shook his head. "They don't know what they cost." Nathaniel did not answer right away. He listened to the engine's pitch, the subtle vibration through the floor. "Cost is a word people use when they want numbers," he said finally. "Some things don't fit into that." Frank nodded, satisfied. He leaned back, eyes forward. No more questions. A flight attendant passed, offering water. She paused at Nathaniel's row a fraction longer than necessary, her expression respectful but strained, as if she were walking near something sacred and didn't trust herself not to disturb it. He declined with a polite shake of his head. 2 rows ahead, Margaret Hale stared at the seat back in front of her without seeing it. Her hands rested on her knees, fingers tight. She replayed the moment again and again, searching for a version of it where she emerged intact. There wasn't one. Every path led back to the same realization. She had not been wrong because she lacked information. She had been wrong because she assumed she didn't need any. Her phone vibrated softly in her purse. She ignored it. Whatever waited on the other side could wait longer. In the forward cabin, Captain Holloway sat rigid in his seat, checklist complete, but mind far from procedure. He had prided himself on judgment, on experience, on knowing when to trust instinct. And yet, instinct had failed him today. Not dramatically, quietly, the way failures usually did. He glanced back once through the narrow aisle, catching a glimpse of Nathaniel's profile. The man looked unremarkable again, ordinary. That, Holloway realized, was the danger. The plane leveled off. Seatbelt signs dimmed. Life resumed in increments. A young man in a tailored jacket leaned across the aisle toward his seatmate, whispering with animated urgency. "You see that?" he said. "That guy. Medal of Honor. On our flight." His companion glanced back, curiosity flaring. "No kidding." The whisper traveled, not as gossip, but as something heavier. A recognition that the narrative had shifted, even if no one could articulate how. Nathaniel felt it. The subtle change in gravity. The sense that the air itself had begun to listen. He reached down, fingertips brushing the canvas of his bag. The medal rested inside its case, unseen again, where it belonged. He had never liked what happened after people saw it. Conversations tilted, voices softened. Assumptions reversed themselves too easily. He preferred the truth to arrive later, when it mattered. The seatbelt sign chimed again, this time followed by Captain Holloway's voice, lower, more deliberate than before. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about 20 minutes from our cruising altitude. Weather ahead looks clear. We appreciate your cooperation this morning." A pause, almost imperceptible. "And I want to add this. We don't always get things right on the first pass, but we have a responsibility to correct ourselves when we don't." The announcement ended there. No explanation, no names, just acknowledgement. Margaret closed her eyes. The words stung, not because they accused her, but because they echoed something she had ignored too long. Nathaniel did not react. He had learned that apologies broadcast publicly were rarely meant for the people they addressed. A subtle movement near the front caught his attention. A man stood from his seat, tall, well-dressed, silver hair combed back with care, late 60s, calm confidence. He turned, scanning the cabin until his gaze landed on Nathaniel. Their eyes met. The recognition was immediate. Not surprise. Confirmation. The man hesitated, then stepped into the aisle. He moved with ease, accustomed to space yielding. Passengers shifted instinctively to make room. He stopped beside Nathaniel's row. "May I sit for a moment?" he asked. Nathaniel looked up. "Of course," he said. The man lowered himself into the empty seat beside him. He extended a hand. "Thomas Reed." Nathaniel shook it. Firm, measured. Reed's grip tightened slightly, just enough to convey respect without familiarity. "I didn't expect to see you here," Reed said quietly. Nathaniel's mouth curved, almost imperceptibly. "Nor I you." Frank's eyebrows rose. He leaned back, giving them space, though his attention sharpened. Reed glanced around the cabin, then leaned closer. "You okay?" Nathaniel considered the question. He had been asked it in rooms with worse lighting and higher stakes. "I'm fine," he said. The situation resolved itself. Reed exhaled through his nose. "That's one way to put it." Margaret watched from ahead, unease crawling up her spine. She didn't know who the man was, only that his presence carried weight. The way people straightened when he passed. The way even the captain had glanced toward him earlier, uncertain. Reed followed her gaze, then looked back at Nathaniel. "People see what they want to see," he said. "Until they don't." Nathaniel's eyes hardened briefly, then softened. "That's why I didn't correct them. Not yet." Reed nodded. "Understood." They sat in silence for a moment, two men bound by knowledge that extended far beyond the aircraft. Frank finally couldn't help himself. "You boys know each other?" he asked, half joking, half serious. Reed smiled at him. "We've crossed paths, that was all." The engines droned steadily. The plane cut through cloud, sunlight breaking across the cabin in flashes. Nathaniel closed his eyes again, but his mind stayed alert. The true conflict was no longer behind him. It was ahead, waiting on the other end of this flight, where assumptions would not be corrected by medals or silence. Reed stood. "We'll talk after landing," he said. "Things are already moving." Nathaniel opened his eyes. "I assumed they would be." Reed paused, hand on the seatback. "For what it's worth, you handled that with restraint." Nathaniel looked past him, toward the window. "Restraint is a habit," he said. "So is patience." Reed studied him for a beat longer, then nodded and returned to his seat. As the cabin resumed its low murmur, Nathaniel leaned back, gaze fixed on the shifting sky. The incident on the ground had been small. Misjudgment, procedure, human error. But it had cracked something open. And cracks, he knew, had a way of letting the truth through. The plane moved forward, unaware it was carrying more than passengers now. It carried consequences, and they were just beginning to take shape. The turbulence hit without warning, a sharp jolt that rattled trays and snapped heads upright, as if the plane itself had decided to remind everyone how little control they truly had. Nathaniel Brooks opened his eyes. The seatbelt sign flickered on. A soft chime followed. Somewhere down the aisle, a child gasped, then laughed, the sound too bright for the tension still lingering in the cabin. The plane steadied, but the mood did not. It never really did after moments like the one they'd just lived through. Across the aisle, Frank tightened his belt and muttered, "Figures. Sky doesn't like unfinished business." Nathaniel did not respond. His attention had shifted inward again, drawn to the quiet pressure behind his ribs. Not pain. Anticipation. He had felt it before, on nights when a phone call came too late, or when a door closed with a different sound than expected. Something had begun, and beginnings were rarely polite. Margaret Hale sat rigid, fingers curled into her palms. The turbulence had startled her, but not nearly as much as the realization now forming in her chest. This flight would not let her forget. It would not smooth itself out and pretend none of it happened. The eyes she felt on her were not accusatory. They were worse. They were thoughtful, measuring. She adjusted the scarf at her neck, suddenly aware of how tight it felt. Karen Doyle moved through the aisle with forced calm, checking belts, offering practiced reassurance. When she reached Nathaniel's row, she paused again. "Sir, are you comfortable?" He met her eyes. "As comfortable as one can be at 30,000 feet, he said. A faint, humorless smile flickered across her face. She nodded and moved on. Captain Holloway remained in his seat, hands resting on his thighs, gaze forward. The cockpit door was closed, but the weight of the cabin pressed through it anyway. He replayed the sequence again. The call from Karen, the phrasing, the speed with which he had chosen the simplest resolution. Remove the variable. De-escalate. Protect the schedule. He had done what he had always done. And this time, it had not been enough. The intercom crackled softly. Holloway did not reach for it. Not yet. Several rows back, the young man who had whispered earlier leaned toward his companion again, voice lower now. "You think he's famous?" His companion shook her head. "No, I think he's important." The distinction mattered more than either of them realized. Nathaniel shifted slightly, the ache in his knee flaring again. He welcomed it. Physical sensation anchored him, reminded him he was still here, still in the body that had carried him through deserts and boardrooms alike. He glanced toward the forward cabin. Thomas Reed sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes closed. To anyone else, he looked like another executive killing time between cities. Nathaniel knew better. Reed was calculating, always calculating. He would already be running through options, consequences, angles unseen. The turbulence returned, lighter this time. The plane dipped, corrected, moved on. A voice cut through the cabin, calm, firm. Captain Holloway. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief patch of rough air. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We expect smoother conditions shortly." A pause. There are moments when circumstances test more than patience. They test judgment. "Thank you for yours." The announcement ended. The words lingered. Margaret felt her throat tighten. Judgment. The word struck closer than accusation. She had built her career on judgment. Quick calls, efficient decisions, trusting her read of people and situations. She had never considered that judgment itself could become a liability. Her phone vibrated again. She pulled it from her purse despite herself. 3 missed calls. 1 voicemail. Her assistant. The subject line of the email preview was short. "Urgent, please call." Her heart rate ticked up. Not fear yet. Awareness. Nathaniel noticed the movement without looking. He sensed the shift in her breathing, the slight hitch. He did not turn. Some lessons required solitude. Frank leaned closer. "You ever notice how people get quiet right before things change?" he murmured. Nathaniel nodded. Silence is rarely empty. The turbulence faded. The seatbelt sign went dark again. The cabin exhaled. Karen returned to the galley, leaning briefly against the counter where no one could see her. Her hands trembled now. She pressed them flat, grounding herself. She had followed protocol. She always followed protocol. And yet, something fundamental had slipped through her fingers. She thought of her father. Navy. Never talked about it. Never wore anything that marked him. She had learned, too late, what silence could mean. She straightened, smoothing her uniform, and stepped back into the aisle. In the forward cabin, Thomas Reed finally moved. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, gaze unfocused. The ripple had begun exactly where Nathaniel said it would. Small at first, almost invisible. But ripples did not stop because you asked them to. Reed's phone vibrated once, then again. He did not check it immediately. He knew what it would say. Across the aisle, Frank cleared his throat. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," he said quietly. Nathaniel turned to him. "I know. Then why put up with it?" Nathaniel considered the question. "Because sometimes," he said slowly, "the explanation isn't for them." Frank frowned, thinking it through. For who then? Nathaniel's gaze drifted forward. For the people watching. Margaret's shoulders slumped slightly, as if something inside her had finally given way. She stared at her phone screen, unread messages stacking up. The world she understood was responding faster than she could manage. She glanced back, meeting Nathaniel's eyes for the first time since the gate. Not with anger, not with fear. With something rawer. Confusion. Regret. The dawning realization that control was an illusion she had relied on for too long. Nathaniel held her gaze for a moment. Not judgmental, not forgiving. Simply present. Then he looked away. The plane cruised on, slicing through clear sky now, sunlight steady across the cabin. From the outside, it was just another flight, another delay smoothed over, another story that would end when the wheels touched down. Inside, something irreversible had shifted. Captain Holloway rose from his seat and moved quietly toward the cockpit door. His reflection passed through the cabin windows, layered over rows of passengers who were no longer quite the same as they had been an hour earlier. He paused, hand on the door, and took a breath. He would make a call after landing, several, in fact. Reports would be written. Conversations would be uncomfortable, but necessary. Because some flights carried more than people. Nathaniel Brooks closed his eyes again as the plane leveled fully, the hum smoothing into something almost peaceful. The medal remained tucked away, unseen. It did not need to be displayed anymore. It had done its work. The truth was moving now, quietly, inevitably. And when it reached the ground, it would not stop there. The descent began sooner than expected. The change was subtle at first, a slight tilt, the engines easing back, the hum shifting pitch in a way seasoned travelers recognized without thinking. The flight attendants moved through the aisle one last time, voices softer now, movements careful, as if the cabin itself were fragile. Nathaniel Brooks watched the clouds thin beneath the wing. Land was coming back into view. Buildings, roads, the geometry of a city reclaiming its shape. With it came consequence. Thomas Reed leaned into the aisle, lowering his voice. "I just got confirmation," he said. "The video's already circulating. Not viral yet, but it will be." Nathaniel didn't look at him. He had expected nothing less. People always recorded moments like these now, not because they understood them, but because they sensed importance, the way animals sensed storms. "How fast?" Nathaniel asked. "Fast enough," Reed replied. "And it's not just the incident. Someone recognized you." Nathaniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "From where?" "From before," Reed said. "Aboard, a room that doesn't like surprises." That earned a faint exhale. Nathaniel closed his eyes. "They never do." Across the aisle, Frank shifted uncomfortably. He had overheard enough to know this was no longer about one rude woman or one flight. He cleared his throat. "Sounds like you're in trouble," he said, half joking, half concerned. Nathaniel opened his eyes and met his gaze. "Trouble is a matter of perspective." Frank studied him, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Margaret Hale sat forward now, elbows on her knees, phone clutched in both hands. The messages no longer stacked quietly. They arrived in waves. Her assistant, her supervisor, an unfamiliar number from legal. She read one line, then another, her breathing shallow. She glanced toward the front cabin, then back at Nathaniel. The distance between them felt longer than the length of the plane. She had built her career on moving quickly, decisively. She had never once considered what happened when speed outran judgment. Karen Doyle stood near the galley, eyes fixed on the floor. She had sent her report already. The wording had been careful, accurate, but accuracy felt thin now. She wondered how many times she had trusted the wrong voice because it spoke with confidence. Captain Holloway's voice came over the intercom, measured, professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing in approximately 15 minutes. Please ensure your seatbacks are upright and your carry-on items are stowed." A pause. "Thank you for flying with us today." The words sounded heavier than usual. The plane dipped again, banking slightly. Sunlight flashed through the windows, then disappeared. The ground rose to meet them. Thomas Reed checked his phone once more. "The first outlet picked it up," he said. "Local affiliate. They're asking questions about why you were removed." Nathaniel nodded. They always start with the wrong question. "What's the right one?" Reed asked. "Why it was so easy," Nathaniel said. to assume. The wheels hit the runway with a firm jolt. The cabin rocked, then steadied. A few scattered claps broke out, quickly fading. The familiar rush of relief passed through the passengers, but something else lingered beneath it, unfinished. As the plane slowed, phones came out again. Messages were sent. Stories began forming in real time, shaped by angles and captions and assumptions layered on top of assumptions. Margaret's phone rang. She stared at it for a full 3 seconds before answering. "Yes," she said. "I'm here." A pause. Her expression tightened. "No, I didn't touch him. I never said that." She swallowed. "I said I felt uncomfortable." Another pause. Longer. Her voice dropped. "I didn't know who he was." She ended the call without looking back. The seatbelt sign chimed. People stood. The aisle filled. Overhead bins opened with dull thuds. The ordinary choreography of arrival resumed, but the mood was brittle now, like glass held together by habit. Karen moved toward Nathaniel's row. "Sir," she said quietly, "when you're ready, we can let you deplane first." He shook his head. "I'll go with everyone else." She hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." Thomas Reed rose and stepped into the aisle, his presence clearing space without effort. He waited beside Nathaniel, saying nothing. Frank stood too, stretching his back. He offered Nathaniel a hand. "Take care of yourself," he said. "And thanks." Nathaniel shook it. "We all carry something," he replied. As the line moved forward, Margaret found herself directly behind Nathaniel. The closeness unsettled her. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally spoke. "I shouldn't have said what I said." Nathaniel didn't turn. "Words matter," he said. "So does timing." "I'm sorry," she said. The apology sounded practiced even to her own ears. He glanced back then, briefly, not unkindly. "Apologies don't erase impact," he said, "but they do reveal intent." She nodded, blinking rapidly. That would have to be enough. The jet bridge door opened. Cool air rushed in. The scent of the airport replaced the cabin's recycled stillness. As Nathaniel stepped forward, he felt it immediately. The pause, the recognition. People waiting beyond the gate, phones lowered, eyes lifted. Not a crowd, not yet. Just awareness. An airport manager stood to the side, posture stiff, eyes wide as he recognized Nathaniel. He approached quickly. "Sir," he said, extending a hand. "We'd like to speak with you, if you're willing." Nathaniel considered him. "I have somewhere to be." "Of course," the man said. "Of course. We'll walk." Thomas Reed fell into step beside them. Conversations hushed as they passed. Some people stared. Others looked away. A few nodded. Margaret emerged last. The gate felt smaller now, too exposed. She adjusted her scarf again, but it no longer helped. She felt eyes on her back, not accusing, assessing. Her phone vibrated once more. This time, she didn't answer. She already knew what it would say. Down the concourse, Nathaniel walked with measured steps, the weight of the bag at his side familiar and grounding. The medal remained hidden, but its presence had already reshaped the space around him. Reed leaned closer. "This is bigger than the flight," he said. "They're asking why someone with your history was treated like that, and who signed off." Nathaniel's gaze remained forward. Then maybe they're finally asking the right question. Behind them, the airport returned to motion. Flights announced, luggage rolled, life continued. But something had shifted. The story was no longer confined to 30,000 feet. It was walking now. The terminal swallowed them whole. Sound rushed back in layers, rolling suitcases, boarding announcements. a crying child somewhere near the food court. The ordinary chaos of an American airport at midday. But around Nathaniel Brooks, there was a pocket of altered gravity, a subtle slowing, as people recognized that something had passed through this space and left it changed. They walked side by side down the concourse. Nathaniel, Thomas Reed, the airport operations manager trailing half a step behind, speaking too carefully. He kept glancing at Nathaniel's bag, then at his face, as if both demanded equal respect. "Sir," the manager said, "my name is Alan Morris. On behalf of the airport authority and the airline, I want to formally apologize for—" Nathaniel lifted a hand. Not unkindly, not sharply. "Save it," he said. "Let's talk about what happens next." Morris blinked. That hadn't been in the script. "Of course, sir. Whatever you need." Thomas Reed watched this exchange with quiet interest. To anyone else, it might have looked like courtesy. He knew better. Nathaniel was not deflecting attention. He was redirecting momentum. They reached a quieter corridor near the security offices. Glass walls, neutral carpeting. The kind of place built for conversations that weren't meant to be public. Morris gestured toward a small conference room. Nathaniel paused at the door. "Before we step inside," Nathaniel said, "I want to be clear. I don't want an escort. I don't want a press statement written in my name, and I don't want this turned into a spectacle." Morris nodded quickly. "Absolutely, of course." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's not an agreement. That's a reflex. There's a difference." Morris swallowed. "Understood. We'll follow your lead." They entered the room. The door closed softly behind them, muting the terminal's noise. For the first time since the plane, the silence felt deliberate rather than imposed. Nathaniel set his bag down and took a seat at the table. He did not open it. He did not touch it. The medal remained unseen, but its presence filled the room anyway. Thomas Reed leaned against the wall, arms crossed, saying nothing. He had learned when to let Nathaniel speak. Morris cleared his throat. "We're conducting an internal review," he began. "The incident on board wasn't an incident," Nathaniel interrupted. "It was a pattern." The words landed flat and heavy. Morris hesitated. "A pattern of assumptions," Nathaniel said. "Shortcuts. A system that listens harder to confidence than to conduct." He leaned forward slightly. "I didn't get singled out because I raised my voice. I got singled out because someone decided I was expendable." Reed watched Morris closely now. The man's discomfort wasn't defensive. It was dawning. Nathaniel continued. "You train your crews to de-escalate noise. You don't train them to question narrative. So the loudest version of the story wins." Morris opened his mouth, then closed it again. That may be accurate." "It is accurate," Nathaniel said. "And it's not just an airline problem." Reed finally spoke. "He's not here to sue you." Morris's shoulders loosened, just slightly. "He's here to make sure the next person doesn't get removed quietly without a medal to stop it." That tension returned instantly. Nathaniel leaned back. "You asked me to step off a plane today. I complied. Not because you were right, because I needed to see how far it would go." Morris stared. "You allowed it?" "I observed it," Nathaniel corrected. "There's a difference." Reed's phone vibrated. He glanced at it, then looked up. "First National Outlet just picked it up. They're asking for comment. They want your title." Nathaniel exhaled slowly. Titles complicate things. He looked at Morris. "If you're going to issue a statement, don't mention my service. Mention your process." Morris frowned. "Our process?" "Yes. Say you're reviewing why a complaint with no physical threat, no raised voice, and no violation of policy escalated to removal." Say you're asking whether bias played a role. Say the quiet part out loud. Morris shifted in his chair. That's significant.
So was what happened,
Nathaniel said. Silence returned, this one sharper. Reed pushed off the wall. He checked his phone again. Another message. His expression changed, subtly. They're asking about the board meeting. Nathaniel closed his eyes for a moment. Not long, just enough to settle something. Then he nodded. I assumed they would. Morris blinked. Board meeting? Reed glanced at him. You don't know who he is. Morris looked at Nathaniel again. Really looked this time. Not the jacket, not the age, the stillness, the way the room oriented around him without instruction. Nathaniel met his gaze calmly. Let's say I've been in rooms where policies like yours were written, and audited, and dismantled. Morris's mouth went dry. Reed stepped in. Nathaniel Brooks served his country in more than one capacity, some of it public, some of it very much not. Morris nodded quickly. Of course, of course. Nathaniel stood. The meeting was over. He picked up his bag. The metal inside shifted slightly, wood against metal. A quiet sound only he noticed. I'm not here to burn anything down, he said. I'm here to make sure it doesn't stay broken. Morris stood too. We'll cooperate fully. Nathaniel paused at the door. Good. Because this won't end with you. They stepped back into the terminal. The noise rushed in again, but it felt distant now, like weather heard through glass. A woman near the gate recognized Nathaniel and froze. Her phone hovered in her hand. She hesitated, then lowered it. Thank you, she said softly. I saw what happened. Nathaniel nodded once. That was all. As they walked, Reed leaned closer. The board wants answers, and they want them fast. Nathaniel's pace did not change. Then they should have asked better questions years ago. Reed smiled faintly. You're enjoying this. Nathaniel shook his head. I'm enduring it. They reached the exit. Automatic doors slid open. Sunlight spilled across the floor, bright and unyielding. Outside, a black sedan waited at the curb. Not a limousine, not a police vehicle. Something quieter, intentional. Reed opened the door. After you. Nathaniel paused. He looked back once at the terminal, the gates, the people moving through, unaware of how close they always were to being misjudged. Then he stepped forward. The door closed behind him with the soft, final sound. And somewhere, far above the runways, systems older than the plane itself began to shift. Slow at first, then with purpose, as a story that was never meant to be told, quietly refused to stay that way. The car merged into traffic without urgency, sliding into the river of late afternoon commuters as if it belonged there. Nathaniel Brooks sat in the back seat, eyes forward, watching the city reveal itself through layers of glass and motion. Brick buildings scarred by time, new steel rising beside them. America, always rebuilding on top of what it refused to fully confront. Thomas Reed sat beside him, phone to his ear, voice low. No, he's not giving interviews, not today. He listened, jaw tightening. Then tell them that. He ended the call and exhaled slowly. They want a name, Reed said. A role they can print. Nathaniel didn't look at him. They always do. The driver glanced at them in the mirror, curious but disciplined enough not to ask. The sedan passed a veterans' memorial, half hidden behind a strip mall. Flags, faded by sun and neglect, fluttered weakly in the heat. Nathaniel's gaze lingered there. He remembered when those flags were new, when the promises they symbolized still sounded clean. Reed shifted. The board meetings moved up. Tonight. Nathaniel nodded. Good. That single word carried weight. Reed studied him. "You're certain?" "I wouldn't have let it reach this point if I weren't," Nathaniel replied. The car turned onto a quieter street. Fewer people, less noise. The building ahead was unremarkable. Concrete, glass, no signage that suggested influence. That was intentional. Power liked to be invisible until it needed to be absolute. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of polished stone and old paper. A security guard straightened when Reed entered, then froze when his eyes landed on Nathaniel. "Good afternoon, sir," the guard said quickly, swiping his badge with unnecessary force. "Conference room's ready." Nathaniel inclined his head. "Thank you." They took the elevator in silence. The doors closed. The hum filled the space between them. "You didn't have to come in person," Reed said finally. "You could have stayed out of it. Let the usual channels handle it." Nathaniel smiled faintly. Channels only work when pressure stays external. This required proximity. The elevator opened onto a floor that felt different, quieter, thicker. The air conditioned not for comfort, but control. Inside the conference room, the board was already assembled. 8 people. Men and women ranging from late 40s to early 70s, suits tailored to perfection, faces trained in neutrality. This was not a corporate board in the traditional sense. This was oversight, regulation, influence disguised as compliance. Conversation died the moment Nathaniel entered. A woman at the head of the table stood. Eleanor Price, chairwoman, former judge, sharp mind, sharper memory. "Nathaniel Brooks," she said. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough to forget patterns," he replied. She gestured to a seat. "Please." He did not sit immediately. He set his bag down at the table instead, slowly, deliberately. The sound was soft. The effect was not. "You've all seen the footage," Nathaniel said. "I won't insult you by pretending this is about one flight." A man to Eleanor's left cleared his throat. "This incident is under review. We're assessing procedural breakdowns." Nathaniel's eyes cut to him. "You're assessing optics." The man stiffened. Nathaniel continued. "A complaint with no physical threat escalated to removal because it fit a familiar narrative, one you've allowed to persist because it's convenient." Another board member leaned forward. "With respect, Nathaniel, airline crews deal with complex situations daily." "So did I," Nathaniel said. "In environments where mistakes buried people, we still learned to ask better questions." Eleanor raised a hand. "Let him finish." Nathaniel reached into his bag. The room tensed. Not fear, anticipation. He removed the wooden case, but did not open it. He set it on the table. This was enough. "You all know what that represents," he said. "Not bravery, not sacrifice. Responsibility. The obligation to protect people who will never have proof of who they are when accused." Silence pressed in. "Today, that proof existed," Nathaniel went on. "Most days, it doesn't." A woman near the far end spoke quietly. "Are you suggesting systemic bias?" Nathaniel met her gaze. "I'm stating it." Reed leaned against the wall, watching the room recalibrate. Nathaniel straightened. "I'm not here to demand resignations. I'm here to mandate change. Training that addresses narrative bias, not just de-escalation. Oversight that tracks complaints by outcome, not volume. And accountability when removal is used as convenience instead of last resort." Eleanor folded her hands. "And if we refuse?" Nathaniel's expression did not change. "Then I step away from this table and let the footage do what it will. Congressional inquiries follow, public audits, testimony. Not because I want spectacle, because sunlight is corrective." The weight of it settled. A man who had not spoken yet finally did. What gives you the authority to make these demands? Nathaniel looked at him. The room seemed to tilt. Because I helped write the compliance framework you're all hiding behind, he said calmly. And because I know where its blind spots were left on purpose. Recognition flickered. Some faces paled. Eleanor exhaled slowly. You never liked unfinished work. I don't like people paying for it, Nathaniel replied. She nodded once. Then we proceed. Decisions followed quickly after that. Committees formed, language adjusted, timelines established. It was efficient, almost surgical. But beneath it ran something else. Unease. Because systems disliked being reminded they were built by people. When it was done, Nathaniel closed the wooden case and returned it to his bag. As they stood to leave, Eleanor spoke again. You didn't have to reveal yourself today. Nathaniel paused at the door. I didn't reveal myself, he said. I revealed a problem. Outside, the sky had darkened, storm clouds gathering in the distance. The car waited again, engine idling. Reed joined him. They're already drafting statements. Nathaniel nodded. Good. You know this won't end cleanly, Reed said. Nathaniel looked out at the city once more. Nothing worth fixing ever does. They got into the car. As it pulled away, rain began to fall. Light at first, then steady, washing streets, blurring lines, and somewhere beyond the glass, beyond the flight and the boardroom and the assumptions that started it all, a quiet recalibration spread, unseen but unstoppable, carried forward by a man who had learned long ago that true authority never needed to announce itself. The rain followed them all the way to the hotel, streaking the windows like unfinished sentences. Nathaniel Brooks stood alone in the room once Reed left him at the door. The suite was quiet in the particular way hotels always were, insulated from the world but never fully detached from it. He set his bag on the desk, not opening it yet, and moved to the window. Below, headlights smeared into lines of white and red. People moving, lives intersecting without awareness. The phone on the nightstand vibrated once, then again. He let it ring. When it stopped, he exhaled slowly and finally turned back to the room. His knee throbbed now, a deep ache that pulsed with the memory of cold ground and hurried movement decades ago. He lowered himself into the chair by the desk, careful, controlled. Age had taught him the cost of impatience. He opened the bag. The wooden case emerged again, its surface warm from the press of the fabric. He did not open it right away. Instead, he rested his hands on either side of it, grounding himself. The medal had never belonged to him alone. It carried voices, faces, names that did not make headlines. A knock sounded at the door. Once. Firm, professional. Nathaniel did not flinch. He rose, favoring his knee, and opened it. A woman stood in the hallway. Late 30s, plain coat, hair pulled back without ornament. She held a slim folder to her chest like a shield. Mr. Brooks, she said, my name is Dana Whitaker. I work with the Office of Transportation Oversight. He studied her for a moment. Not her credentials, her posture. The way she waited, without pushing past the threshold. Come in, he said. She stepped inside, eyes scanning the room with quick efficiency. Thank you. I won't take much of your time. People who say that usually do, Nathaniel replied, closing the door. A corner of her mouth twitched. Fair enough. She remained standing until he gestured toward the chair. She sat, crossing her ankles neatly. We've been tracking complaints related to passenger removal for several years, she began. Patterns, disparities. Your incident accelerated things. He nodded. Acceleration was always the real disruption. She opened the folder. We've had internal resistance, jurisdictional disputes, delays framed as due process, but footage changes leverage. Nathaniel leaned back. Footage changes narratives, he said, not necessarily behavior. That's why I'm here, Dana replied. We need testimony. The word hung between them. Nathaniel's gaze drifted back to the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass now, steady, insistent. Testimony meant exposure, meant faces he had worked to keep out of light would be dragged forward. Some deserved it, some did not. You want me to speak about today, he said. And about before, she added gently. He smiled without humor. That's a longer conversation. We're prepared for that, she said. Congressional hearings are already being discussed. Quietly, for now. Nathaniel closed his eyes for a moment. He had hoped to delay this part longer, but storms didn't wait for comfort. I'll consider it, he said. Dana nodded. That's all I can ask. She stood, gathering the folder. Before she reached the door, she paused. For what it's worth, she said, this didn't start with you, but it might end because of you. Nathaniel met her eyes. It never ends with one person. She gave a small, respectful nod and left. The room fell quiet again. Nathaniel sat for a long time without moving. His thoughts drifted, unmoored, back to a different room. Concrete walls, fluorescent light. Men arguing in clipped voices about acceptable losses and plausible deniability. He had been younger then, sharper, still learning how systems preserve themselves. A memory surfaced unbidden. A young officer, barely 30, standing across from him after a failed operation, hands shaking. Sir, I followed protocol. Nathaniel had looked at him and said, Protocol is not absolution. The phone rang again. Different turn this time. He answered. It was Reed. They're lining up pundits already, framing this as an overreaction. One bad employee, one misunderstanding. Nathaniel closed his eyes. Of course they are. There's more, Reed continued. Margaret Hale's company placed her on administrative leave, pending review. Nathaniel felt nothing. Consequences rarely landed where people expected them to. She reached out to legal, Reed added. Asked if she should issue a statement. Nathaniel considered. Tell her not to center herself. Silence would serve her better. Reed exhaled. I thought you'd say that. After the call ended, Nathaniel finally opened the wooden case. The medal lay inside, unchanged. It did not glow. It did not accuse. It simply existed, heavy with meaning. He lifted it carefully, the ribbon cool against his fingers. He remembered the day it had been placed around his neck. Cameras, applause, a general's speech polished smooth by repetition. He remembered thinking none of it could bring back the men who should have been standing beside him. He closed the case again. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Not close. Not yet. Nathaniel lay back on the bed, hands folded on his chest, eyes open. Sleep did not come easily anymore. Too many layers of thought. Too many possible futures branching out from a single moment on a plane. By morning, the story would be everywhere. Simplified. Hashtagged. Debated by people who had never been removed quietly from a space they belonged in. He turned his head toward the window as lightning flashed briefly, illuminating the city in stark contrast. This was no longer about one flight. It was about how easily authority mistook inconvenience for threat. How quickly silence was read as guilt. How systems protected themselves by discarding the unprotected. Nathaniel Brooks closed his eyes at last. And somewhere, far from the hotel room and the rain-soaked streets, people who had never learned his name began to recognize something else instead. The shape of a reckoning. It was coming. Slow, methodical, and impossible to divert once set in motion. Morning came without mercy. Grey light slipped through the curtains, flattening the room, stripping it of the protection night had offered. Nathaniel Brooks was awake before the city fully stirred. He sat on the edge of the bed, feet planted on the carpet, hands resting on his knees, listening to the distant hum of traffic building like a low tide. His phone lay face down on the nightstand. He did not need to turn it over to know what waited there. When he finally did, the screen lit up with names and numbers that hadn't spoken to him in years. Former colleagues, government offices, a senator's chief of staff. Missed calls stacked like evidence. The reckoning had arrived right on schedule. He dressed slowly. Pressed shirt, dark slacks, the same boots he had worn onto the plane. Nothing that suggested ceremony, nothing that invited symbolism. He refused to let the day costume itself around him. Downstairs, the hotel lobby buzzed with restrained urgency. A television, mounted above the bar, played a muted news segment. Footage from the plane looped silently. His own face, blurred but recognizable, frozen mid-movement. A caption crawled beneath it, already simplified beyond usefulness. Unarmed passenger removed from flight. Truth emerges. Nathaniel looked away. Outside, a black sedan waited again. Different driver, same efficiency. The hearing room was not what people imagined. No grand hall, no marble columns. Just fluorescent lighting, long tables, microphones positioned with clinical precision. The kind of place where words were dissected until they lost blood. Thomas Reed walked beside him, jaw tight. "This is being framed as fact-finding," Reed said. "But make no mistake, they're watching reactions more than testimony." Nathaniel nodded. That's always the case. Inside, the room filled quickly. Officials, a handful of reporters allowed in under strict rules. Staffers with legal pads already half full. At the far end, Margaret Hale sat alone, hands folded, eyes fixed straight ahead. She looked smaller here, not diminished, just stripped of the armor she had trusted too much. She glanced up when Nathaniel entered. Their eyes met briefly. This time she did not look away. The session began without ceremony. A chairman spoke about passenger safety, about balance, about lessons learned. Carefully neutral language designed to offend no one and correct nothing. Then Nathaniel was sworn in. He sat upright, hands folded loosely, voice steady when he spoke. He did not dramatize, he did not embellish. He described the sequence exactly as it had happened. The request, the refusal, the escalation, the assumption. At one point, a congressman leaned forward. "Mr. Brooks, why didn't you identify yourself sooner? Surely that would have resolved the misunderstanding." Nathaniel looked at him for a long moment. "Because the system shouldn't require credentials to behave fairly," he said. "Because most people don't carry proof of their worth in a bag." Silence followed. Not stunned, considered. Another question came. "Are you saying the crew acted with malicious intent?" Nathaniel shook his head. "No. I'm saying intent is irrelevant when impact is predictable." Margaret shifted in her seat. When it was her turn, she stood slowly. Her voice did not shake, but it lacked the polish she once relied on. She spoke of perception, of pressure, of making a call she believed was reasonable at the time. Then she stopped. She turned toward Nathaniel. "I was wrong," she said. "Not because I lacked information, because I trusted my assumptions more than my observation." The room stilled. That admission carried more weight than any defense could have. The chairman nodded once. "Thank you." Outside, cameras waited, hungry and indiscriminate. Nathaniel did not stop. Reed shielded him just enough to pass. Inside the car, silence returned. "You changed the temperature in that room," Reed said quietly. Nathaniel leaned his head back against the seat.
Temperature changes when enough people stop pretending not to feel it.
As the city slid past the windows again, Nathaniel closed his eyes. He thought of the plane, the aisle, the pause before everything tipped. This had never been about vindication. It was about friction, about forcing systems to feel the people they moved too easily. By afternoon, statements were released, policies revised, committees announced, language softened, promises made. By evening, the news cycle shifted, already searching for the next spark. But something had lodged itself where it couldn't be scrolled past. That night, Nathaniel stood alone again in his hotel room, city lights flickering below. He opened the wooden case one last time. The medal caught the light briefly, then dulled again. He did not feel pride. He felt resolve. Because the real measure of what had happened would not be headlines or hearings or consequences for one woman or one crew. It would be what happened the next time a quiet person said no, and whether the system listened. Nathaniel closed the case, placed it back in the bag, and turned off the light. Tomorrow, he would go home, and the work would continue, unseen, unfinished, exactly where it had always lived, in the spaces where power met people, and was finally forced to answer. The town welcomed Nathaniel Brooks back without ceremony. No cameras waited at the small regional airport. No signs. No speeches. Just a handful of travelers collecting bags beneath flickering fluorescent lights and the familiar smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. He preferred it this way. The sedan dropped him at the curb, and Reed shook his hand once, firm, respectful, then disappeared back into motion. Nathaniel stood for a moment with his bag at his feet, breathing in the quiet. Home was not a place that applauded. It was a place that endured. The drive to his house cut through roads he had known for decades, hardware stores with sun-faded signs, a diner that never changed its menu, front lawns trimmed by habit, not pride. The world here did not ask who you were before it decided how you fit. It simply waited to see how you behaved. His house sat at the end of a narrow street, modest, brick worn smooth by time. Wind chimes clinked softly on the porch. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, the air cool and familiar. The silence was not empty. It was earned. He set the bag down by the table and did not open it. Not yet. That evening, he walked to the corner store as he always did. The clerk nodded. "Same bread?" he asked. "Yes," Nathaniel said. On the way back, a neighbor paused by her mailbox. "Saw you on the news," she said, not accusatory, not impressed, just stating a fact. "You okay?" He nodded. "I'm fine." She smiled, satisfied, and returned to her letters. That was the exchange. No more was required. The days that followed unfolded slowly, as they should. Reports continued. Policy revisions made their way through committees. New language appeared in training manuals. Quiet adjustments that would never trend, never carry a headline, but would change outcomes when no one was watching. Nathaniel spent his mornings in the garden, coaxing tomatoes back from the brink, hands in the dirt grounding him in a way no hearing ever could. His knee ached more now. Age had no interest in medals or authority. He welcomed that reminder too. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Plain envelope, careful handwriting. From Frank, the man from the plane. He wrote about seeing the medal, about how it unlocked something he had sealed away for years, about pride returning slowly, cautiously, like a limb waking from sleep. Nathaniel folded the letter and placed it beneath the wooden case on the mantel. Foundation mattered. Another letter followed, from Karen Doyle. She wrote about training changes, about slowing down, about learning to ask better questions. Nathaniel read it once and set it aside. Growth did not need applause either. A third letter came weeks later. Margaret Hale. Short, direct. She did not ask forgiveness. She acknowledged harm. She described the discomfort of sitting with it, the loss of certainty, the cost of assuming speed equaled clarity. Nathaniel read it carefully, then placed it in the drawer where he kept things that did not belong to him alone. Life resumed its quiet rhythm. Mornings, errands, the occasional nod from strangers who recognized him but did not intrude. Respect expressed as distance. One evening, he took the wooden case from the mantel and set it on the table. He opened it and looked at the medal under the warm light. It was unchanged. It always would be. The meaning shifted around it, not within it. He thought of the plane, the aisle, the pause before the world corrected itself. He thought of how easily it could have gone another way, how often it still did. True authority, he knew, was not revealed by titles or force. It emerged when systems were forced to confront the people they overlooked, when silence was no longer mistaken for consent, when dignity held its ground long enough to be seen. Nathaniel closed the case and returned it to the mantel. He turned off the light and sat in the dark for a moment, listening to the house settle around him. The story would move on without him now. It always did. Others would carry it forward, in ways both visible and unseen. That was enough. He lay down and slept without dreams. Somewhere else, a flight attendant paused before escalating a complaint. A captain asked one more question. A passenger waited instead of assuming. Small choices, quiet shifts, the kind that never made the news. And that was the point. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments with 3 simple words. Respect before judgment.